Hello and welcome to my video. Today I'm going to talk about the Clawhammer brew in a bag system. I've owned it for a few months now and I've done a few brews on it. Based on my own research and my own personal experience, I find that I can go over the pros and cons and my overall impressions of the actual system. I wanted to make a video on this today because there aren't a lot of YouTube videos explaining the pros and cons and going over the system itself. There's a lot of channels that use it in their brew videos, but I found that it would be useful for people shopping around for electric brew in a bag systems to actually make a full review on the system for people to use in their own research. Before the Clawhammer system, I was using old water coolers, 10-gallon water coolers that I got off of Northern Brewer, and they're kind of converted into a mash tun and hot liquor tank. I was using propane at the time as well, so I had about a 7-gallon kettle. The system worked great. I liked using it. It was just kind of cumbersome. It took up a lot of space, and I did want to just upgrade my system, so that's what really made me start looking into the Clawhammer system. When I was first shopping around for an electric brew in a bag system, the first things I really looked into was the Robo Brew. The Robo Brew was attractive to me just based on a price perspective, though it did seem like it had a lack of support online. I did try to post on their forums sometimes. They don't really seem to have a full-fledged website for their actual product. It did make me nervous, 5 or 10 years down the line to see how much support I'd actually get on the system. Then I did look at the Grainfather. The Grainfather is kind of an upgraded version of the Robo Brew. It's significantly more expensive than the Robo Brew, but it did have a dedicated website and dedicated support staff for it. Also, the fact that it did have a Bluetooth controller was really, really attractive to me. But the one big problem I saw with those types of systems was the fact that everything seemed to be crammed inside the system, which made me nervous about proprietary parts and the lack of work that I could physically do to the system. The nice thing about the Clawhammer system is that all the parts are actually separate: the pump, the wort chiller, and all of the components. Also the element as well. It's all modular. You can swap those components out yourself, or you can work with Clawhammer support and get them swapped out through them as well. What made me ultimately decide on the Clawhammer system was the fact that it was modular, and also the price point was about where I wanted to spend. It's just under the Grainfather, which is surprising to me because if you actually look at a lot of these not single vessel systems, a lot of them are very, very expensive. So the fact that you can get this system for under $900 is really, really great. And the other thing is just the overall quality of components. Okay, to just go over the specs, it is a turnkey 10.5 gallon 304 stainless steel system. The element is a 1650 ultra low watt density element. It does come with a 15 amp PID digital controller with a temperature probe. It also comes with a pump, a plate chiller, grain and hot basket, silicone hoses with quick release fittings. And to go over the controller in more detail, we have the pump on and off button here. We have the heat on and off button here. At the bottom here, we could see that this is the temperature that the controller wants to heat the temperature to, and the top is the temperature that the probe is picking up. You can easily change the power of the element by holding onto the AM button and adjusting the power here. And then you can always change it back to control the actual temperature you want to reach by adjusting that here. Next, I want to go over the pros and cons of the system. So the first thing I want to note is some of the pros and cons I'm going to make a note of here aren't specific to the Clawhammer system, but are more about switching to electric brew in a bag as well. And I'll make a note when I do say a pro and con that isn't specific to the system, just so you are aware of it. But I do want to include those because I find that if you are looking at the Clawhammer, you're also weighing to switch to electric brew in a bag entirely. So it's good to know the cons and pros of switching to just in general the system itself. The first pro I want to go over is the temperature probe. So the temperature probe is very well calibrated. I have an instant read thermometer that I use to check the water temperature while I had it running for the first test cycle, and I found that it was nearly perfect on the temperature calibration. So I was really, really impressed with that. The next thing I want to make a note of here is the gallon markings inside the kettle. They are marked really, really accurately. I measured out a gallon and I poured it in there, and it was nearly perfect as well. So people who do use water out of their tap, or they have like 5 gallon vessels that they kind of dump in there, you can trust the markings on the kettle as well. The next pro I want to go over is about the controller. The controller works really, really well. It holds temperature extremely accurately, and it is very easy to use, surprisingly. When I first received it, I'm like, oh crap, this is going to be a little confusing to use. There's not a lot of buttons on here, and the screens just have some numbers on it. How do I actually calibrate this thing? But after just using it for about 5 minutes, I was able to figure out how to use the system without any real guidance from the internet. So really just playing around with it myself. The next pro I want to go over here is the price point. Like I made a note of earlier, I feel like the price point for the system is pretty fair for what they're providing. And if you look at the Grainfather, it's actually more expensive than the system. But if you look at systems that are comparable to the system, and when I say comparable, I mean not a single vessel system like the RoboBrew, Anvil, Mash and Boil. A lot of them are very, very expensive. So the fact that you can get this for just under $900, I think is very fair. The next pro I want to go over is using a plate chiller. Now, if you've never used a plate chiller before, they look a little funny, but they work extremely well. So the first time I used this was with the actual system, and this cooled 5 gallons of wort in like 7 minutes. I was blown away by how quick this thing cools. It's really, really easy to set up too. It's a low footprint as well, and it's a great thing to have. If you have used these before, then obviously it's probably not going to be too much of a surprise for you. But I always use those immersion copper chillers, and I was really, really impressed with how quickly this chilled the wort. The next pro I want to go over is customer service. And I'm actually pleasantly surprised with the customer service. I've messaged Clawhammer 2 individual times before I even bought the system, just asking them questions when I was in the process of comparing this system along with other systems. And I got a response within 24 hours. There was no ticket or no automated message I got. I just simply got an email from someone from the Clawhammer team, and they answered my question. The next pro is this is considered a high gravity system. And what that means is that it can hold a lot of grain. If you look at the competitors like the single vessel, Anvil, Mash and Boil systems, it seems to be the first thing you're going to realize is that you can't hold a lot of grains with those systems. Now, they can hold a lot of grains, but I know with this system, I can hold well over 20 pounds of grains without really any issue. The first thing you're going to realize when you have really high gravity brews or a lot of grain in your other systems is the efficiency is going to start to dip because you're getting less utilization from the grains. This system handles it pretty well. The last pro I want to go over that is Clawhammer system specific is what I actually brought up earlier in the video, the fact that the system is modular. The element you can swap out at a Home Depot. The pump you can swap out by just getting a new pump. The plate chiller is just a standard plate chiller. All of these components you can just swap out and replace. There's really no issues. There are some parts that you might need to rely on the Clawhammer support for. For example, the grain basket and the kettle and the actual controller. You know, those you'll have to rely on the actual manufacturer for those. But the fact that you can just buy these parts from your local stores really made me excited about the system. And for the parts that you can't buy at a local store, you can't buy on Amazon, you have to rely on the manufacturer for, you can buy the individual parts from Clawhammer itself. So you don't have to buy a new system or anything like that. If you need to buy a specific part, like just the controller, you can buy just the controller from Clawhammer. And since these components are modular, that kind of goes into my next point, the fact that if there are upgrades to the components or the parts, you can actually just buy them from Clawhammer and add them to your system. If you want to get a better controller, if they upgrade the controller over time, you should just be able to buy the controller from Clawhammer and plug it into your system, and it should just work. So that's kind of the exciting part about the system being modular as well. If you're looking at all of those other single vessel systems that have all the components crushed into the bottom, if they make small product improvements on those, you can't really just swap them out. You need to buy a whole new system for those. And that kind of goes over the pros that are specific to the Clawhammer system. There are a few pros that I want to mention that you will see when you swap over to electric brew in a bag. And the first thing is you're going to notice is how compact the system is. So as you can see on this table behind me, this is everything. This is all I need for brew day. And if you're using those old cooler setups, or you have the hot liquor tank, you have the mash tun, you have the the 3-vessel system. Sometimes you have multiple burners going, and that can take up a whole lot of space. Also, if you brew at other people's houses, like friends' house or family's houses, or maybe at a homebrew club or association, it can be really cumbersome to shove all that in your car, and it's just more crap to clean. This is really, really compact, and this goes for all the systems as well. This was one of the major reasons why I wanted to swap to this, because I found that when I was brewing with my family and friends, it was just too much to bring all that back and forth. Another thing I want to talk about too is that there's no open flames. So the fact that it is electric, you can brew inside. You just need to ventilate the actual humidity out, and it works really well. So no more freezing my butt off when it's winter and I want to brew in the garage. I can just bring it in, and I just have to make sure that it's well ventilated. The last thing I want to talk about that isn't Clawhammer specific, but typically with these electric brew in a bag systems, you don't need to Vorloff and you don't need to sparge. So those are two steps that you typically have to do when using a cooler setup. With brew in a bag specifically, and also the electric systems, you can skip those steps. So it does save quite a bit of time during brew day. Sparges can take upwards of an hour on a proper sparge. So the fact that you can save all of that time and not have to do it is a huge plus. And that kind of concludes the pros. I do want to move into the cons of the system. Now, there are a few cons I want to bring up. Again, same with the pros. Some of the cons aren't specific to the actual Clawhammer system. Some are cons when you have to take into consideration when you are moving to electric brew in a bag. So the first thing I want to bring up, and this has got to be the biggest con of the Clawhammer system, and also just most electric brew in a bag systems in general, is the slow heat up times. Now, if you've never used electric systems before, it is significantly slower to heat up your wort and also to get the boiling temperature than if you were to use propane and open flame systems. Now, just to note, this is a 120 volt system, so you can plug this into any outlet in the house or in your garage or at a friend's house. And taking that into consideration, it does take at least an hour to hit mash temp. So from room temp to your 150s, it's going to be at least an hour. And then also when you're going from mash temp or mash out temp to boiling temp, it's going to be about another hour for a rolling boil. So take those into consideration on your brew day as well. I find that if I'm brewing at my house, that I have to actually get out there and start the water going about an hour and a half before people start coming over. But if you're bringing the system over to people's houses or to an association and brewing, you should be aware that it's going to take some time for this to heat up. And if everyone else is on propane, that they'll be probably halfway done with their mash by the time you're mashing in. So you're going to be a little bit more behind with the actual steps. Now, just for transparency's sake, Clawhammer does offer a 240 volt system, which should significantly increase the heat up times of the system. The only issue with that is it costs $600 more for the actual upgrade. And also you have to take into consideration, you might have to call an electrician to run a special 240 volt line to your garage or wherever you want to brew. This significantly limits your ability to move around where you want to brew. And also, if you're brewing at friend's house, you have to also find an outlet and make sure they have an outlet for you to actually plug into. That's the main reason why I didn't want to do it, is because some of my friends don't even have these types of outlets in their house, so I couldn't even brew at their houses if I had that system. So that kind of covers the big con that I wanted to go over first. There are some smaller issues that I see with the Clawhammer system and also with just swapping to electric brew in a bag in general. I did want to bring them up in the video just for full transparency's sake and to make sure that everyone has all the information that they could possibly need to make an informed decision on a system. So the next con I want to go over is the actual hop basket. So the hop basket is about the same height as the actual brew kettle, so the depth is fine, but the width is very, very thin. So I find that on hop forward beers like IPAs, the pellets, if you're using pellets, the pellets expand a lot. Now, if you're using whole leaf hops, it could be even worse. But this is so narrow that a lot of the times with the expansion of the hops, that it's just not enough space to actually add a lot of hops for hop forward beers. For example, when I was brewing an IPA, there was a lot of hops in it. During my flame out editions, when I poured in the last pellets, I noticed that they were actually resting on a cake of hops. The hops expanded so much in the basket that I actually had to push in the hops to get contact with the liquid with a spoon. So that's something you kind of have to take a look at. Now, if you're not brewing something that's super hop forward, you'll never notice this problem. But again, if you like to brew IPAs, just kind of peek at this every now and then. Make sure you're getting proper contact with the hops. So the next con I want to go over is cleaning and sanitation. This isn't quite a specific problem for the Clawhammer system. This is probably going to see this, you're probably going to see this problem with any electric brewer bag system you swap to, but it's one thing you should be aware of is you do save time on not having to sparge and boil off, but you add time when you're cleaning. A lot of these components are closed vessel systems, like the pump, for example. You can't just open it up and clean it with a brush, or the plate chiller, for example, is the same idea. You can't open this up and clean it. So you have to rely on PBW or like chemical cleaners to wash this out of any debris or hop sludge or anything like that. So you have to run, after brew day, you have to essentially run liquid through this 3 times, one with hot water to clean it out, and then one with PBW, and then one last time with just hot water to clean the PBW out because you don't want any of that residue still in the system. So it adds quite a bit of time at the end of your brew day. So that's one thing you should also take into consideration. The next thing I want you guys to be aware about, and this isn't like a massive deal, but just something that I want to tell you guys, is that they do give you 13 feet of hose with the system. If you watch the video, they tell you to cut it into 3 sections, essentially. One is a 6-foot section, one's a 4-foot section, and one's a 3-foot section. The 6-foot section is to connect your pump out to your kettle in. Your 4-foot section is to connect your kettle out to your pump in, and your 3-foot section is to hook up your chiller out to put the wort back into your actual vessel. I found that the 3-foot section they recommend you cut is too short. I find that during chilling, I have to keep my chiller pretty close to my brew kettle, which can be sometimes inconvenient in the spaces that you're working. And since the hose is only 3 feet, when you plug it in and you actually drape it over, the hose kind of like goes down about like to here. And when you first turn on the pump, when you get the water or the wort cycling through it, a lot of the times it likes to shuffle or move. The first time I did this, I turned the pump on without really holding the hose down, and the hose came out of the kettle and sprayed wort all over the place. So that's something you have to take into consideration. I'd almost rather just recommend cutting the 6-foot maybe into like 5, and then you'd have another foot, because another foot on this actual hose length would be really, really useful. You probably would never see wort spilling at that point. Another con I want you guys to be aware about, again, this isn't that big of a deal, but I just want to make you guys aware, is that the chiller they give you has 2 male fittings on the to connect your hoses to. This is fine if you have a female to female connector hose. I find that most people don't have one of those laying around. Most people have a female to male, where the male is going to be used to connect like a spray nozzle to it. So I wasn't actually able to use this on my first brew day because I actually had to run to Home Depot and pick up a female to female little adapter for it, so that way I could hook up my actual hose to the chiller. So you might have to pick up some aftermarket little adapter for it so you can use your hose. Now, if you have a female to female hose, then this won't be an issue. But most people don't have one of those laying around, like I didn't, so I actually had to buy a little adapter for it. And the last con I want to talk about for the system is you'll notice that I have some sort of insulating wrap around my system, which I would recommend getting because it does help with the boil times and the heat up times. The insulation wrap they sell at Clawhammer's website is $45. Now, I bought that not really thinking about it. I just kind of added it on in my cart and bought it along with the system, not realizing that $45 for these components is a complete ripoff. You can buy these components for like 15 bucks. How they deliver it to you is they give you like a square that you have to cut for the top portion, and then they just give you like a sheet, like a little 5-foot sheet that you have to manually cut all the holes in yourself for, and they charge you $45 for that. They also give you like 3 strips of HVAC tape. HVAC tape will cost you like $3 or $4 on Amazon for a whole roll of it, and you can get like 15 feet of insulating wrap for like $13. So to see like 3 times the markup on it is a little insane. I do regret buying that from Clawhammer. I wish I would have just went to Home Depot and picked up those parts myself. Now, if they did cut the holes for you, so you just had to wrap it around, then maybe that would be worth it. And that's something I would recommend to Clawhammer if you are going to mark it up by 3 times the price of the actual parts, that you do provide a service with it and you do cut all the holes for the actual customer. But if they don't want to do that and they aren't going to do that, then I would recommend not buying it from Clawhammer and just getting the insulating wrap from Home Depot or Lowe's or your local hardware store. And that goes over my review of the Clawhammer system. My overall impressions is I love the system. I think it's worth every penny. I think it beats the competition, and I would recommend it to anyone if you're in the market for an electric brew-in-a-bag system. I think swapping to brew-in-a-bag and electric is just the right idea. It's a smaller footprint. You're getting pretty decent efficiency, and I've been really enjoying it thus far. I hope you guys enjoyed the review. Please subscribe to the channel. This is my first video on the channel, and I plan on releasing more brewing content and home brewing information and guides on the YouTube channel. So please subscribe and also like the video so it can get recommended to other people looking and that are in the market for the Clawhammer system or just electric brew-in-a-bag systems in general. Also, if you had any questions or if there's something I didn't cover or you want more detail about a specific component or part of the actual system, please leave a comment down below. I'll check the comments occasionally and I'll make sure to answer any of your guys' questions down there. And we can have a discussion about the system in the comments. So anyway, thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate you sticking through the whole video, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.